I wish now, looking back, I was much more aware of the symptoms of bowel cancer. I wasn't aware of it. It seems crazy now looking back, having, watched my aunt go through it and die of it, but we didn't really talk about the symptoms, so I wasn't aware. I went to the doctor back in, it was about a year before I was diagnosed. I had some symptoms that I had quite a lot of pain in my abdomen and a bit of bloating and just generally uncomfortable. She kind of jumped to the conclusion that it was IBS. I think very much looking back, I think I fitted the stereotype of somebody who would have IBS.
Rachel's symptoms continued and gradually worsened, so she mentioned them to the doctor at another appointment.
I did mention at the time that I thought I saw blood in my stool, and she sort of said, well, it could be piles, and she also said to me, interestingly, that as I was of an age, I was 44, 45 at the time, and she said, well, you might be coming up for early menopause, and sometimes that can mess around with your bowels, so I'm sure that's all it is. I then did some little investigation myself, and I looked and I thought I had ulcerative colitis. And that was my first conclusion, really, because I thought, well, IBS, it's too bad for that. So I went back a third time.
By now, Rachel's symptoms had got much worse, and she saw a different doctor at her surgery who went through a comprehensive checklist of symptoms.
And as she was going down the checklist, I was getting more and more worried because it really hit me, I think, by then how severe my symptoms were and how much I'd kind of downplayed them, I suppose, or been fobbed off, I guess. She did even ask me how many times I was going to the loo in the night, and at the time I said it was 5 times, which, looking back, is pretty ridiculous.
A year after her first symptoms, Rachel was referred to see a colorectal surgeon who found a lump in her stomach and signs of blood. He booked her for an urgent colonoscopy.
He came up after the colonoscopy and he said, right, we found a tumour. He said, it's nasty, which, really looking back, I could have done without the extra adjectives. I kind of knew it was nasty. It's nasty. He said, we're going to send you right down immediately for a CT scan. Please drink this fluid. And he also added, at the time, which, again, looking back, I didn't think was terribly necessary, but I realise now they tell it as it is. He said, I don't know whether we're going to be able to operate. So I felt, incredibly sick and physically very ill, and I passed out. I think when you have a shock like that, your whole horizon narrows down and you just can't take in information. I couldn't read a paper, I couldn't watch the television, I couldn't do anything other than just get up, deal with what hit me in that day, and everything was just very blinkered and narrowed down. But there is certainly a need for information at that stage in bite-sized chunks. You don't want the internet was just, you don't want that. You just want a very small bite-sized chunk of information that you can digest, and then gradually, as you get used to the shock, and it is processing the shock, you can then take more and more information on hand.
Rachel was diagnosed with bowel cancer, which had spread to her liver and lymph nodes. She had an operation to remove the tumour and 20 of her lymph nodes, and a second operation to remove a section of her liver and her gallbladder. This was followed by 8 months of chemotherapy before a CT scan in July 2012 revealed that she was finally in remission.
I think one of the things when you're diagnosed with bowel cancer is I felt it was, I knew very little about it. I knew very little about it when I was diagnosed. And then when I did start to research, I then thought, oh gosh, I felt it was an older person's disease. And then I thought I didn't know who I needed to talk to people more my age and women. And I needed to talk to people who'd gone through what I'd gone through and perhaps was suffering some of the things that I was worrying about with my children. I also had a colostomy bag at the time, which was, again, pretty unnerving when you're well, any age, but when you're in 40s, I felt a little bit kind of self-conscious about things. So anyway, I went on to Twitter. It seemed that there was a lot of conversation going on around young people, and I guess that was a method, the medium of choice that a lot of young people communicating through. So we did immediately find each other, and enormous support, help, both practically, emotionally, and just the humour of it, really, because I felt I needed to deal with it with a bit of humour, and I needed to have, I needed to get a lot of stuff on my chest I couldn't perhaps talk to, my folks about and my children about. So it became a real support network, and I know the charities, again, very much engage in that. And so we had, it felt protective, it felt safe, it felt really well supportive.
Although Rachel found support for herself through social media, she didn't find any help or support for her 2 children, who were aged 11 and 13 when she was diagnosed.
The thing, I think, when I look back at the children, I think there's an enormous gap in when you've got children of an age that my children are. They need information. They're seeing things out in the world, and they're reading and seeing things. And of course, they're terrified, and trying to get someone that they can talk to, I think, was absolutely critical. And I never found that. I did actively look for sources of support, particularly one-to-one, and there really isn't anywhere out there that you can, or certainly nowhere that I found, that children of that age can meet and talk with other children going through it. I do look back and I think, the scars are always going to be there. I mean, not just the physical ones, but the emotional ones. And I know I very much worry really about what it's done to my children. I mean, we joke about it, but I need to grunt or make a noise or a cough or anything, and my son and daughter are straight there with a, "Mum, are you all right? What's happening? Is it the cancer? Are you okay? Are you well?" So I know they live with the fear, as much as I'm living through that. And every day it gets easier, and every day we get stronger.
Having got the all clear at her last scan, Rachel is now preparing to go back to work and get back to normal life.
You have to keep strong and positive, and you have to keep a focus and not drag yourself back down to kind of those dark places where you were. But there is an enormous amount of support from charities like Bowel Cancer UK, and from Twitter, and from Facebook, and just from friends and family. There's a lot of help out there.